Hi, I'm Dalvet Quince. One way to help manage type 2 diabetes is to regularly exercise. My exercise program can help get you into a routine that works for you. Keep in mind, managing blood sugar also takes the right
diet. Hi, I'm celebrity chef Franklin Becker. Ever since I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, I've adapted my cooking style without sacrificing flavor. If you want to learn more tips about diet
and exercise,
visit mytype2transformation.com.
Nothing brings us together like Eggland's best eggs. Always so fresh and delicious. Plus superior nutrition like 6 times more vitamin D, 10 times more vitamin E, and 25% less saturated fat compared to ordinary eggs. For us, it's eggs any style, as long as they're the best. Eggland's Best. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs. Visit egglandsbest.com to learn more.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, an employee is gunned down after hours at a Bismarck liquor store. Who was responsible for the deadly holdup? We'll review the latest podcast from Dakota Spotlight, Homicide at House of Bottles. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Rebecca.
I'm really enjoying the giant collar on your sweatshirt.
Do you like my giant collar?
Does it zip up and become like a turtle?
Oh, let's see.
neck?
Hold on. Let's see. If I zip it up, I can't get it over my neck, but if
I'm assuming it would become a turtleneck if you
You'd have to have a long neck for that to work.
Yeah.
Or fold it over.
Yeah, I look like I'm in the IRA. I look like one of the provosts from
just wait.
Say Nothing.
Just wait, Kevin. Just wait.
Wait, Laura's going to try something.
And also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of the Piper Green series of cozy mysteries, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca. So yeah, I don't have a turtleneck. I have it's kind of like a Star Wars sort of situation, like when Luke Skywalker's out with those like big things in that winter scene.
The Hoth?
Yeah, it's got like a hood sort of thing, but no turtleneck.
Oh. And finally, our resident Doubting Thomas, author of the City trilogy of novels, host of Rip Current, Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hi, Toby.
You're not interested in what I'm wearing?
What are you wearing? Flannel? T-shirt?
I've got a fleece-lined flannel shirt because it's freaking cold.
You look like you're about to illegally take lumber. Timber,
yes.
yeah.
I'm wearing my
very
thickest
likely.
sweater because, we'll talk about that in a second. But first, Kevin, this is Thursday's program. What's coming up on Monday's show?
Yeah, on Monday, we're going to be talking about the new true crime show, The Bunker, from Viaplay.
All right. So we kind of alluded to it before, and I'm hoping that by the time this podcast comes out, it won't be the case anymore. But the world has basically turned into the world from The Day After Tomorrow.
So cold.
That movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. It was like a snowed a foot in Florida and in New Orleans. And I saw these incredible videos of people in New Orleans putting crayfish seasoning on the snow to try to get it to melt. It was a joke. It was like
it's so
they're
hot.
putting like Creole spice on the snow instead of salt, because that's what they use. Yeah, it's wild. And I woke up this morning here and it was 16 below. How have you guys been dealing with this? Oh, I should also say our shower, this has never happened before. And it's been cold here before. Our shower froze. And when I first turned it on, the water didn't come out. And then we watched it. I left it on and we watched the shower head start defrosting.
It tinkled like a middle-aged man.
Until it kind of burst out. It was really fucking cold. So how are you guys coping? Laura, how are you coping?
Well, I'm kind of in hibernation mode. My Mini Cooper really doesn't like the cold. When I was visiting Lance last weekend, he doesn't have a garage. My car doors froze shut. I couldn't get into my car. I don't have an automatic starter. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to wait here for a while.
Yeah.
But I have been wearing my new regular wardrobe item is my sleeping bag coat, which I just wear everywhere now. It's like one of those long, I think it's like a Land's End coat, and it goes all the way down to my ankles and has a hood. And I've been forcing myself to at least walk for 10 minutes so I don't go into full on hibernation and just survive on like crackers and pimento cheese dip for the rest of my life. Because that's kind of the direction I'm heading right now.
Yeah, I have one of those coats too. They're incredible. Toby, how have you been coping? What are you doing to survive?
I don't think I'm really doing anything differently than I usually do, to be quite honest. We went down on Sunday night for a show in Cambridge, and it got out like right at the height of snowstorms, and we just got a hotel room rather than trying to drive back. But other than that, I put on my boots, wear my coat.
Yeah.
I've got a couple different like heavinesses, warmth factors of hats. So I'm sort of doing the medium one right now.
That's brave of you. It's very brave of you. This morning we have dogs, this is not great weather to have dogs and have to take them out. And so I went out this morning, and it's like very clearly one of those days where it's dangerous to be outside past a certain number of like minutes or whatever. I went outside and the liquid in my eyeballs like froze. My hair immediately turned white with ice, and one of my fucking dogs could not find a spot to poop. And I was just like, come on now. Come on. What are you doing? Just get it out. It was really rough. Anyway, speaking of cold things, this is a cold night podcast that we're talking about now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Should we get to it, Kevin?
Sets the mood. Nice job, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I was doing my best to set the mood. Let's talk about what we're supposed to be talking about. Leading off.
Steve and Russell walked past the neat stacks of beer cases, wine bottles, and assorted hard liquor. The place smelled of cardboard, and the hum of coolers buzzed in their ears.
On a cold North Dakota night in February 1999, Robbie Rahrich's friends and fiancée waited for him to come home from his shift at a Bismarck liquor store. When they went to House of Bottles, they discovered Robbie's body in the back room and money missing from the cash register.
He was leaning backwards into the chair with his head bent lifelessly all the way backwards. There was a large pool of blood on the floor. Roberdeau took a closer look. He saw what was pretty much unmistakable, a bullet hole in the man's head.
Investigators looked into who might want to target the store and have the opportunity to hold it up. They turned their attention to Shawn Helmenstein, who'd been in Bismarck at the time but fled to Montana.
He had talked to the owner of the trailer, asked him if Shawn had a pistol. He said, yeah. He says, where's it at? And he says, it's in the bedroom back there.
From Dakota Spotlight and PorchLight Podcast Network comes Homicide at House of Bottles. Host James Wolner tells the story through long-form narrative, observations from investigators, and an interview with the man convicted of killing Robbie Rahrich. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about plot points from Dakota Spotlight, Homicide at House of Bottles. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Kevin, what is Dakota Spotlight?
It's an independently produced podcast, and I got to say, whenever we do something that's like, not Wondery or iHeart, it feels like we're like punching down at an independently produced podcast when it's not put together well. And I'd say even like grading on a curve, this has some problems. It's largely a one-man show, but it's somebody whose background is not in journalism or audio production. So like the qualifications are like the true crime fans, which are absolutely fine. They don't commit the sins of the unborn, which I mean the unborn, I mean the podcast, the unborn. But you can't get in the same amount of trouble as they did over at The Unborn. So anyway, that's who the podcast is made by.
Yeah, and it's just this guy, basically. This guy is like the punk company, right? James Wolner?
I don't know the company, but he's the
all
the
over
host.
The website.
He's the right. Yeah, okay.
It's
yeah.
like Dakota Spotlight with James Wolner, and you go to the About page, and it's like James Wolner, and it's like all James Wolner.
Yeah, this is their 11th season, so this is the first time we've had a listen to them.
And they've got ads. So let me just say that I'm just going to preface this by saying I know the people who made this are nice people, and it's not about the people who made this. Toby, does this feel like a podcast from 2025 to you?
It doesn't. And I think we're going to dive into this stuff. It feels like something that was maybe 10 years ago, before like some of the conventions had sort of been worked out, and things that don't necessarily work very well have been sort of laid to the side, such as running minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes of unedited tape, things like that. So I appreciate what Kevin was saying about that. And I think there are, given that this is like a 1 or 2 or possibly 3 person project, I think there's a lot of stuff that they have done as far as research goes that's good, but the actual sort of product of the podcast just feels like it's not sort of up to speed with the way sort of the current state of best podcasting best practices are, given the amount of time and energy and sort of information that they have in the podcast. Like I kind of feel as though there's stuff there to make something that was better than this. But again, it sort of feels like there are certain things that the industry has moved on from that they continue to do.
There are certain things for me in this podcast, and Laura, you share my feelings I see from your notes that feel like they should never have been done in podcasts, and they shouldn't be done in writing either. There's so much research and detail, and all of it is included. You know, I knew this was going to happen immediately in the podcast when we learned what songs were on the radio. Mm-hmm. You know, Britney Spears had just had One More Time dropped, replaced by Angel of Mine by Monica. Then we hear about people leaving an event and all of the restaurants that were available for them to go to. Hungry visitors crammed into local favorites like
Denny's, The Woodhouse, A&B Pizza, Big Boy, Applebee's, Space Aliens, McDonald's, and Burger King. And for those craving a drink, there were plenty of options. There was Buck's Bar and Peacock Alley downtown and Burnt Creek Club north of the city.
That's a long-ass list of potential restaurants that people unrelated to this story could have gone to after an event that was largely unrelated to this story. Laura, did you find that we just got a lot of detail?
No, not at all. Yeah. And so I have to say, like the first episode of this podcast where it was literally just the host talking, it felt like I was listening to the host reading what I'm going to call like a 1990s era true crime book, where the style at that time was to literally include every freaking detail down to the color of socks somebody was wearing in a book about a crime that somebody wanted to know everything about. For me, I was like, oh God, are they actually going to have any people in this podcast? And then I was like, maybe there was a book that was written about this and we're just making it almost into kind of like a podcast audio book. But what unfortunately happens with that level of detail when it's so much, and not for nothing, but some of these details just weren't super interesting.
All of them, Laura, not some.
Well, I'm trying to be kind. It just, for me, I'm like tuning out. I'm getting like highway hypnosis as I'm driving because I'm like, what's happening? And then you segue from that to then this like 10-minute uninterrupted, unedited 911 call.
Oh my God. Oh no, what happened?
So the only thing we would hear over and over again that wasn't actually the host in the beginning was sort of this recreation of somebody calling the House of Bottles, which was like the girlfriend of the guy who gets killed. And so it'd be like, House of Bottles. And then she'd be like, and she was going to bring him dinner because she liked to make sure he ate. And she's calling to see if he ate dinner. That story just kept going over and over and over again. And I'm like, okay, I get it. She's checking on him at the House of Bottles. But like, it felt so repetitive in a way that I was just very frustrated listening to it.
Yeah, just off of Toby's point about sort of the style, it occurred to me that this is kind of like in the vein of very early Aaron Mahnke and Lore, right? We're just sort of the one person kind of like just reading the entire story, which doesn't quite work great with investigative podcasts. And Laura, you're right about sort of the level of detail and the way it's used. And as nonfiction writers ourselves, we have been cautioned about the danger of falling in love with your research and, guilty at times and have to get pulled back by an editor. I don't know if you need to list every community that was represented at the state wrestling championship. It's almost funny when you go back and listen to it. Like, are you punking us now with this? That like, not only everything that was on television, and we find out about like the intricacies of a municipal level liquor license dispute that is somehow related to this homicide. It just was kind of like, it's great to have all of that information, but the way it was kind of just sort of thrown in without any discernment about what was really important and leaning on that, I think like really kind of made the storytelling not as conversational.
Yeah, I don't think any of the details were interesting, as I said. And I think that there needs to be an understanding, and Toby, I'm going to let you go and talk about this a little bit, that the listener will never miss what they don't hear. There's this sort of sense of like, we need to include all this stuff so the listener understands. The listener understands the story and they do not miss what isn't there unless there's like a gaping hole like in the plot or unless it's clear that there isn't any reporting or research. But like, I would never have missed that list of restaurants from across the river. What were you going to say, Toby?
Well, it's kind of funny because this is sort of the opposite of the podcast we talked about on Monday where they didn't give nearly enough details to what the hell is going on. Yeah, I kept waiting for them to either explain, like, why are you giving me this list of restaurants? Is it giving me some kind of insight as to, like, what kind of town it was? Like, is it just all you have is fast food restaurants and it's that kind of, but it didn't seem to be that. It just kind of seemed to be like, well, this is what the place looked like at this time. And they had this restaurants and these bars. And it was kind of the thing where you could have been like, there was a mix of family restaurants and franchises or whatever, if you felt like you had to talk about restaurants. But yeah, that whole, like, you don't know what isn't told to you. What did you say?
I said, listener won't miss what's not there.
Right. Like, this is the kind of stuff.
But Toby, how are you going to know where to go to eat when you go to that town? You don't have, like, I always like to research where I'm going to eat when I go somewhere.
Yeah, if you're going to Bismarck in 1999, you want to know these things.
I want to know where the Space Aliens is, whatever that is.
Yeah. So anyway, I agree with you. And I was kind of waiting for, it's just giving me some kind of insight into what kind of town it was. But I think it was just sort of like name checking places that happen to be open in 1999.
Listen, you're never going to miss what you don't hear if you join our Patreon, right, Kevin?
Oh, my goodness gracious.
That's right, because how many episodes are back there?
What a transition. We have 700 episodes.
Yes. We're in the business section.
Should I just start listing them?
Yes.
Well, if you go back in order, episode 700 was the Crime Writers on After Show, which you can get by joining us at the leading off level. Episode 699 was Married with Podcast, our exclusive podcast about where we give relationship advice.
What were you wearing when we taped that, Kevin?
What was I wearing?
I was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans and socks and a t-shirt. But if I'd wanted to, I could have been wearing a sweater and a blazer.
Oh, stop it. Now, at Married with Podcast, one of the questions that we deal with happens to be a listener's upstairs neighbor keeps yelling at their child with special needs.
Yes.
What should they do?
What should they do?
Other great podcasts include Rebecca's Readathon and Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast. Laura, you always solve mysteries in your quaint AF town of Exeter, New Hampshire. And the last time there was something going on at the nearby mall involving one of your favorite activities.
Yes, I went to the Holiday Cat Show, and now I am on the hunt of somebody that grew up in my quaint AF town, has a really interesting retirement job, and I am going to shadow him for the day as he drives the Snowcat up Mount Washington in the winter. This is like a van that looks like it has like tread tires. I don't even know how to describe them. And it goes up to
it's like a tank.
Yeah, it's like a tank. So I'm going to go in the tank with this guy who grew up and was like neighbors with my favorite realtor friend in Exeter and like find out, how does one get a job driving a Snowcat? How does one learn to drive a Snowcat? Will I be allowed to drive a Snowcat? Or is that against insurance regulations? We're going to find out.
Probably. Ben, you think it's cold in Exeter? See what the top of Mount Washington is like. Laura, when you went to that cat show at the mall, did you enter the West Wing and then go past Claire's and then
past the Orange Julius? Yes.
Through Forever 21?
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've been doing a lot of like random mall things. Like I went skiing in a mall, then I went to the cat show in the mall. And the cat show in the mall was really strange because there was like a sign when you went in that said, no dogs past this point. And I was like, oh.
Who would bring a dog to a cat show?
An anarchist.
You know, there was a lot happening. But the mall is very different now. Like half the stores are empty in our local mall. And that's why apparently they're renting out spaces for cat shows.
Yeah. Yeah. They need to have a choir practice night at the mall like they do in Somebody Somewhere, right, Kevin?
Well, they had a weird thing at the mall. When I was still in the online dating world, they had this thing they were doing. They had like a co-working space thing. They had turned into like people that had like remote jobs. And then they were like
a WeWork?
Yeah, kind of. And then they were like, come to, and I thought it was weird, like what demographic was I that I was getting this ad? Come to the beer pong socializer meetup dating thing in the mall in the co-working space. Yeah. And I was like,
I'll just say, and right now we're very off topic, Kevin, but we have a dead mall in Concord, New Hampshire. That's in that town over from us. Very dead. It's actually now going to be turned into like something else.
I think it still has a JCPenney, but
for a while, no, it closed finally. But for a while, there were these 2 department stores called Bon-Ton, men and women's, a brand I'd never heard of before I came to this mall. But then the stores closed, and they turned one of the Bon-Ton department stores into a charter school. So it's like, go to your homework where bras used to be.
Hey, we did a live show at that mall.
That's right.
What was the store that got changed into the Black Box Theater?
Coldwater Creek.
It had been a Coldwater Creek, yeah.
Because we had dressing rooms in the Coldwater.
Which were used to old fitting rooms, yeah.
Yes, and they also had a community theater there. So when we did our show, there was like a set on there, and like Kevin laid down and took a nap on the little bed.
Yeah, and there was a stain on the jacket I was going to wear in their show, so I went next door to Chico's and bought a new jacket. Anyway, Kevin, what were you talking about?
Yeah, I was talking about all the great stuff you get at Patreon, including Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. Toby and his friends get together, just like your book clubs, where you bring out the white wine and you start shit-talking the books. Toby doesn't always do that, but he always has interesting discussions. Toby, what is the book that everybody needs to download on their Kindles or check out from their library or otherwise get current so that they can listen?
It's Murder in the Bayou by Ethan Brown.
Have you started it?
Have I started it?
The answer is no.
No. But I do have the guests lined up.
Oh, who's joining you?
Well, it's CWO favorite Simone Paget.
Yeah.
And then making her debut on the Deep Dive, Justine Vanderloon, who was the creator and host of Believe Her.
Great podcast.
Yeah, which is a favorite of all of ours. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful podcast.
All right. Sounds great. Another way you can support us, dear listener, is by going to our Amazon storefront, where you can see some of our favorite things on your way to do the rest of your shopping. Rebecca Lavoie, you don't have to list them all in order.
No.
But can you tell us what is this week's Amazon recommendation?
You know what I love buying on Amazon, Kevin?
What?
Greeting cards.
What?
I'm telling you, their greeting card selection is off the hook. Because if you go to your local store, you're going to pay like $4 for a greeting card, right? So you may as well just order one that's exactly what you want from Amazon. Like you can look up birthday card with a hedgehog on it. And I swear to God, there'll be like 50 birthday cards with hedgehogs on them. I love buying greeting cards on Amazon.
If you want to buy a very intricate greeting card, pop-up ones.
They have them on Amazon.
Yeah, that's where you want to go.
Musical ones. They have
It's a card which is like a gift, yeah.
I got Henry one that has a working drum set on the cover of it. Like, it's freaking awesome greeting. I'm telling you, it's a great place to buy greeting cards.
All right, I'm leaving it to you to put that link up there. But we have to find out what Toby Ball's deep cut recommendations are. Toby, what did the listeners
Ball's deep cut recommendations? Okay.
Yeah. Toby, what did the listeners inspire you to pick?
You know what I love to buy on Amazon, Kevin?
What do you love to buy on Amazon, Toby?
Niche erotica.
Wow.
Okay.
What kind of niche are we in?
Well, I'll tell you. Our first deep dive is stick handling, a hockey romance.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I feel like it's one of those books that somebody came up with the title and decided they had to write a book about it.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's 2 men. It's very, very romantic.
And then this doesn't really fit into niche erotica, although I suppose it could. Baby foot original exfoliation foot peel.
Yes.
Callus remover for rough, cracked, dry feet. Dead skin removal. Foot peeling mask for baby soft feet - spa.
Kevin, remember when we did some baby foots?
A long time ago.
You put it on, you soak for a while, and then like a couple of days later, all
Your
of the
whole
skin
foot
comes
falls off. Okay, I've heard about that, and I think it sounds kind of gross.
Leprosy sock?
I've never heard of a foot mask before. That sounds like a sock.
I've heard of it because like your foot like literally disintegrates after you put it on.
Yeah, it might. Yeah, I have so many calluses, but anyway, it's fascinating. All right, Kevin.
Yeah, so remember to shop us first. Go to amazon.com/shop/CrimeWritersOn. We earn commissions on qualified purchases.
Wow, Kevin.
Even on stick handling.
This has been an action-packed business section.
It has been.
But before we end it, I have to ask, do we have any Patreon patron saints of the week this week?
Our Patreon patron saints are Sarah Sims and Samantha Leaf. Bless you.
Sarah and Samantha, I know who you are. Thank you so much for being on our Patreon. We really, really appreciate you. Why don't you, everybody on Patreon, tell some other people to join because it's really, really fun back there. We appreciate everybody who's on our Patreon and those of you who just muddle through the business section anyway. All right, Kevin, can I go ahead and fade that music out?
You may.
All right, let's get that done.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day favorites on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
Create your oasis with Thuma, a modern design company crafting simple, elevated furniture from premium, eco-friendly materials. Thuma's core collection, the classic bed, nest dresser, and pillar bookshelf, combines the technique of Japanese joinery with thoughtful design for timeless style and lasting quality. Assembly is quick and easy, taking just 5-ish minutes with no tools required. Explore the full collection at thuma.co or visit their flagship location in New York City. For $100 off your first bed, head to thuma.co. That's thuma.co.
So, Toby, there's a lot of uncut audio in this podcast, something we've alluded to. There's a whole episode almost that's like just the guy confessing to doing the crime and then being brought to the crime. It's like uninterrupted tape. How do you feel about many, many minutes of uninterrupted tape being played in the podcast?
So sort of my experience with this, having made some podcasts where I thought I had some awesome tape, is that it generally sounds more awesome when you're making the podcast than if you're listening to the podcast. So people were like, yeah, you want to break that up a little bit. And I was like, but it's so intense. Like there's one where Shawn, the perp, is giving a tour of the House of Bottles and sort of pointing out where stuff happened.
Okay, whereabouts were you around here?
Right here.
You were right here? Was Robbie in the chair there?
He was standing.
He was standing right around in here someplace?
Yes.
Okay, what did you guys talk about?
We were just BSing.
There's a combination of like, he's clearly like walking around and showing things, but there's no cutting in to talk about like what they're actually looking at or what he's talking about. And then there's also this problem where the detective's voice is much, much louder than Shawn's voice, but they don't do anything to equalize the volume. So I was listening to it as I was driving, and I just spent the whole time like turning stuff up and down and up and down and up and down so I could hear what was going on. It just kind of feels like podcasting's kind of moved on from this. So it was just a little surprising to hear it not just once, but I think there's at least 4 times when you listen to at least 5 consecutive minutes of tape. And sometimes the tape is just like, there's long pauses or there's like this like random stuff about Shawn, like wondering what's going to happen to his CDs, I think at one point, or, you know, it's like, if I was like fully ensconced in this and like really wrapped up in Shawn or whatever, I could see where this is like, well, this is, you know, kind of heart-wrenching or compelling or whatever. But if you're just listening to a podcast, like you can maybe use 10 seconds of it just to show like he clearly had no clue what was coming down the pike. Like he's just so worried about things that are just so completely irrelevant to what's about to be a situation. But you don't have to listen to it for like 15 minutes of this guy just being completely deluded about what the future holds for him.
Yeah, it's sort of the flip side of all the different research where it's like we're not discerning what's important and what isn't and providing context for those two things. Same thing with this detective's phone call that he makes to Shawn where we hear all about it. And again, it just comes in sort of dropped in. No context given, no guiding narrative along through it. And like the 911 call, you're right. I'm not usually moved by 911 calls with some people are and they feel it's exploitive or whatever, which I can respect. But you're right. This seems like excessive to me. And I think like the host could have jumped in and maybe summarized or at least moved the action along. You know, and the only one that had like a sort of heavy amount of editing was this montage we hear from Shawn's prison calls
on his tablets.
Yeah, but they're like, you know, we start to get a setup of like, well, the things that he's interested in. He's like all of a sudden interested in his PlayStation and his this and that.
CDs.
His CDs. And then we hear like an extended montage, but a lot of different things that tonally bounce back and forth between him being blasé to him being upset to, you know, to him like bragging about what his stuff is. And that almost like moving too fast. So it's, you know, I don't want to be like, you can't do anything right, but it just seems like that they just keep missing the mark on all these things.
Well, here's the issue for me. This is my opinion. You should never play this much tape extended unless there is a reason. There is no reason. So I think about like Jason Moon's reporting on the Jason Carroll case. There are long slices of interrogation tape there. Jason does come in, but there's long slices because the interrogation is at the heart of the case. Whether or not this young man was coerced by his own mother to confess to a crime he didn't commit is the heart of this case. So Jason will say, listen to what I'm about to play. It's a couple of minutes or whatever of interrogation tape, but here's what you're going to hear and blah, blah, blah. And so you are listening for something and there's a reason to listen to it.
And the audio quality also has to be
or
able to sustain
if the
along.
audio quality isn't good, you have to explain why. Because, the microphone was hidden or because this was like the 5th time they interrogated him or whatever. There was none of that here. None of it. And no reason to hear it because they literally could have just said the cops took him to the place and he showed them where the crime happened. And I was listening I was like, is he being read techniqued? Am I supposed to hear that? Is he not the right guy? Am I supposed to be listening for that? Nope. One
of the things that was frustrating when we first started getting these audio clips is there wasn't a transition. So in the beginning, I was like, is this an audio clip that's real or is this a recreation from a transcript? Because there wasn't really sort of a setup that alerted me that we were actually hearing from the real people. Once I started listening, I said, oh, okay, these are real people, but they were just dropped in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Laura, you brought this up that sort of like we get through the first episode, which is almost, with the exception of the 911 calls, almost exclusively narrative read. And then when they tease episode 2 and I hear like, wait a minute, they actually interviewed people? They have other tape? Like, why wasn't that in the first episode? Like, you couldn't get anybody to just sort of do the setup about what happened that night?
Right.
A cop could have told you sort of like what the setup was. You could at least break it up. I was really stunned by that, actually. I'm like, oh my God. I thought this whole podcast was going to be this guy reading.
Me too. Well, and the other part, Kevin, is like when they did do the actual interviews, not just like, here we have some tape of an old interview that we're going to drop in. They didn't use them in a way that showcased the personality and the information from the people they were talking to. They'd have a really short clip from whoever it was they actually sat down and spoke with, and then segue back into this sort of retelling. So I just felt like they were used in a way that wasn't really effective and didn't make sense to me.
Well, the exception to me, Laura, was the jailhouse interviews at the very end.
Those ones were good. I liked those.
Do you have any idea where it went?
Yes. It got jammed in the gun, and I didn't realize it until the next day. So it never got totally ejected. So that's why they never found the casing.
I'm like thinking like, this is valuable. Could this have been used somewhere else? I mean, you're tipping your cards too much to have Shawn, but I don't know. Beats me.
I am very befuddled by the existence of any of this because I'm just going to say it. Are we now doing true crime podcasts about robbery murders at liquor stores? Is this where we are? There's no larger insight here. There's no miscarriage of justice. I could count the number of twists on this podcast on 0 hands, okay? There's no like mystery.
Alternative suspects.
No.
Obfuscation.
I don't understand it at all. And then there's this episode 5 that's just about the victim. So I'm like, maybe here's where we learn, like, he's the son of the president of the United States or something that is like, oh shit. Like, I don't mean that literally, but like there's 0 oh shit moments, no mystery, no twists, no suspense, a very unfortunate crime, obviously. But then they catch the guy who did it. He tells them how and why he did it.
Again and again.
That's the whole thing. I mean, Toby, am I missing something that you were able to glean from this that I was not?
No, and I kind of kept waiting for it because it did. I actually think the beginning of this podcast where they're sort of following the movements of different people on the night of the murder was promising. Like, that's actually kind of a setup that I'm sort of a sucker for. But, I kept waiting for, like, because it gets set up and it's like, oh, okay, so it's this guy who's wearing the cowboy hat and the duster jacket. Like, it seems like this is the guy who's all the places where the guy who would kill. So I guess it sucks for him that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's going to be put in the frame for this. But then it's like, oh, so the obvious guy was the guy who actually did it and he just admitted to it. Like, I was waiting for there to be a reason why it wasn't Shawn up until the point where he confessed, and it didn't seem as though he was coerced or like held without sleep for 18 hours or read techniqued or anything. So Yeah, when it got done, it's just like, well, this is it feels like a very straightforward case. Like, I was trying to think of like, how can you make this interesting? And in some ways, like, you kind of got these little hints about Shawn's life, like right at the end, about how his brother was murdered and his father committed suicide. And I was like, well, maybe it's like two people from very different lives, but geographically similar areas who like kind of meet in some way, and this is what happens. But there wasn't even that. It was just like, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and nobody was ever mistaken about everything, and it turned out exactly what you thought it would. The end. So I'm not sure why this was picked. The choice of case seems a little weird. If it's, this is a regional podcast series, and so if the only reason that it's interesting is because it happened here, then maybe it's interesting to people in North Dakota, but that's not a good enough reason for the rest of us.
Yeah. The only thing that was kind of interesting was that question about life sentences. And when you're given a life sentence at a younger age and the court is saying, we consider a life sentence to be this percentage of your life expectancy before you're eligible for parole, and how that really sort of unfairly penalizes and gives longer sentences to people that are convicted when they are younger. That was interesting to me. I was like, that's an interesting legal question.
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting thing in this case because, he was younger when he was sentenced and obviously didn't make out with that argument. But I thought, well, that's kind of something there. But, that was about it. This is very straightforward. It's somebody that worked at the liquor store with him, that needed money, that knew how to get into the liquor store, that knew where the money was, that was going to do this. And it's like, how many similar murders are there around the country that are this exact same thing? So unfortunately, because of that, it fell flat. And I just felt like, God, have I become so jaded that I don't like, but I think it was just, unfortunately, the way that the story was told was just boring.
Well, it's the thing that we would say at like book signings and book events, which is that every murder is a tragedy, but not every murder is a book or a movie or a story.
Right.
Because a guy walks up to another guy on a sidewalk and kills. It's a tragedy, but there's no bigger story there. There's nothing really worth exploring, right? There's no obfuscation. I mean, the guy left for a week, but he wasn't, running for Mexico wearing disguises. There wasn't a lot. There was no red herrings, alternative suspects. It was just a very straightforward kind of thing. And maybe it's a big story and something that lives in local legacy or local lore, which made it interesting for this series. But
they never told us that either, if that's the case. Kevin, why do you have this note that says adverbs, exclamation point?
This is the note, adverbs. We've never talked about adverbs in 10 years of this podcast, but I'm going to bring it up for a reason.
All right.
One of my big takeaways from Stephen King's book On Writing, he's a great piece of advice, which is do not use adverbs. Now, why? Now, I could say Rebecca Lavoie was impatiently waited for her chance to talk. Or the thing that he's saying is, why don't you write this instead? Rebecca Lavoie drummed her fingers and then rolled her eyes, listening to Kevin go on and on, right? That says the same thing, but getting rid of the adverb forces you to write something better.
Showing you.
Something, starting this, right, exactly. I started thinking about when I'm listening to like adverbs being ascribed to people's behavior and their thoughts, that he thought, reluctantly or did this or that. And I'm thinking, how do you know? How do you know? You can't know, right? You're just projecting a fictionalized version of something in what's supposed to be nonfiction. And so when I kept hearing some of these things, I'm like, that person decided, oh, well, I guess it's time to go do this. And they were bored by what was on TV or whatever they were. It was just like, okay, you're being an author projecting certain things on these characters, but that's not nonfiction. That's not good true crime. This would make a really great long-form magazine article, or it might make, a more traditional true crime book. But again, projecting those things, those adverbs stood out to me because I kept thinking, how do you know this? Because we know you didn't talk to all of those people. We would have heard them.
The other thing I was kind of interested about is, when you read the little thing about the overall podcast, it says that the host is committed to ethical podcasting and centering the victims. I think that's something that a lot of people try to do. And I think is harder than it sounds to make it work in a way that really humanizes the victim rather than creates this like really rosy picture of who they were. In this case, it really seems to be spending a certain amount of time. I think there's maybe 3 different sections that kind of focus on the victim, this guy, Robbie. Like, obviously people want to remember their friends in the best possible way or whatever, but I didn't feel like I knew this guy at all, other than he wasn't like a jerk and people basically liked him. Like, I think there are examples of it. And I think like somebody like Connie Walker, like you can't like ask people to aspire to do as well as Connie Walker does on that kind of thing. But that's like sort of a model that you could like listen to get a sense of what is effective and then do your own sense of things. Because I mean, people want to do it, and I think that's the right thing to do. And I think it's a pushback against sort of these more exploitive podcasts that people often associate with true crime. But again, I think it's hard.
It's hard because these stories are not about the victim. And Connie Walker is good at it because who the victims are integral to the story she chooses to tell. If you don't understand who the victims are, then you don't understand why the story is interesting, or like they're actually integral. Like missing and murdered Indigenous people, like the people who are the victims are the center of her reporting. Now, people don't want to be exploitive, then pick other stories, because in most murder cases and most stories about crimes that have twists and turns and stuff, you wouldn't be talking about the victim at all if they hadn't died. They are the precipitating factor. Their murder is the factor that kicks off a series of events that is the story, right? And so you want to talk about being victim-centric, it's like, just don't be a dick about the victims. But you also don't have to spend an inordinate amount of time telling us every single thing that we don't need to know about a person that's completely unrelated to the case. Like if you look at like great reporting on cults, for instance, learning about the victims is important because you got to figure out how they got where they were to be sort of sucked into the machine of it or whatever, right? And there are many, many instances like that. But if you can't figure out a way to tell the story of a victim without it being a very special episode, like in a sitcom, a very special episode where you have to go aside and then tell us the whole history of the person, if you can't figure out a way to doing it other than that, you've either picked the wrong story or you shouldn't be having the listener do this so that you can check a box. That's my feelings about it.
To piggyback on that, the other thing they did in this is, I mean, yes, you can be sensitive to not exploiting a crime. At the same time, you can tell the other side of it too. And when they segued into talking about the man who was convicted, there was this long thing about we don't want to glorify him, this, and this is why we're talking to him, this. I'm like, you can still tell his story from behind bars in a way that you don't have to give this big disclaimer like that.
It's like they're anticipating criticism they haven't gotten yet.
Just because you're telling the story of how somebody landed where they did and committed a crime does not mean you're glorifying it. You're showing the entire picture. It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in there.
This cold and flu season, Instacart is here to help deliver all of your sick day essentials. Whether you're in prevention mode and need vitamins, hand sanitizer, and that lemon tea your Nana swears by, or you're in healing mode and need medicine, soup, and a lot more tissues, simply download the Instacart app to get sick day supplies that reinvigorate or relieve delivered in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Excludes restaurant orders. Service fees and terms apply.
All right, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Dakota Spotlight, Homicide at House of Bottles? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
This is unfortunately a thumbs down for me. I feel like there was a lot with this podcast that were things that made it very hard for me to follow along and feel invested in this story in any meaningful way. There was a lot of narration by the host, which was very, very detailed, lots of information. But because it went so far to that level of information, it slowed any sort of narrative momentum or suspense. There was really no suspense in this podcast. There was a lot of information here. I still came away feeling like, was this the type of crime that really benefits from retelling in a podcast format? Or is this the type of crime that benefits from being retold in a regional magazine where people know about this crime and know about this area and might remember it happening, as opposed to the rest of us who really don't have any context about this crime or why we would feel invested in learning more about it. So for me, this was it was a big no for me. I can go on, but I think the lack of editing, the use of unedited audio clips in a way that, again, slowed the story and didn't really use the audio they had in the most effective way, just took me out of being able to follow along with this in a way that felt like I was taking something away from having listened to this podcast. So unfortunately, thumbs down for me.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Dakota Spotlight, Homicide at House of Bottles?
Yeah, so I'm kind of doing this off the top of my head, so don't at me. But I think when you're making a podcast, there's probably like 4 phases. And, one of them sort of choosing your topic. One of them's doing all sort of the background research, getting interviews, things like that. One of them's writing scripts. And then the last thing is like the actual sort of production of the episodes, right? I think of those 4, I think one of them is done pretty well, which is, I think, the research and the getting the interviews and stuff. I think they've assembled the stuff you would need to tell this story. I think part of the problem is the story that was picked isn't really super compelling. I think the way that the story is kind of laid out and the amount of time they spend on different things, and as we talked about in the main, some of the things they choose to spend a lot of time detailing just feels a little misguided or old or something. And then the actual production of the episodes with, lots of uninterrupted tape and things like that, it just doesn't feel like best practice, basically. So, I hate to give a thumbs down for this because I know it's a small team and it's a project they put a lot of work into and feel strongly about. And it's not a disaster in the way that some things I give a thumbs down to are, but I just kind of feel like it falls short in a lot of ways. It's a thumbs down.
Kevin Flynn.
Yeah, I also have to go thumbs down. I mean, I think it's an achievement that they are a small team and able to, put together 11 seasons of what they do. But I would say that if you really wanted to take the quality of these podcasts to the next level, that it would probably benefit them working with experienced podcast producers who could help them craft the narrative better. I think that the part of this particular season, it suffers from the selection of its crime because it's very straightforward and it doesn't have a lot of the elements that you can use to craft a really good true crime series. So working with that, you're kind of at a disadvantage. There was a lot of research that was thrown in, but it just seemed like there was not a lot of demonstrated thought into what was important and what wasn't important, as opposed to just putting everything in. So it made it very difficult to kind of really get a grip on what the story was, to follow it along, and it doesn't sound like a modern podcast. Just one other thing here is that, the writing involved, that the host's writing voice is really suited for the page to be read and not consumed by listening to it. The phrasing and the composition is very bookish and not conversational. A lot of phrases and clauses and, starting and stopping and things like that you can follow along with your eyes when you're absorbing and comprehending the written word. But all of a sudden, you might feel like you just missed something when you're hearing it out loud. So there were some good elements here. I thought at the end, the interview with the accused was somewhat enlightening, or at the very least, kind of on par with what we'd hear in other things. But it's a small podcast, but still grading on a curve with a lot of respect. Fairly, I'd say this isn't very good.
It's not. It's thumbs down for me, too. James Wolner kept talking about this podcast that he makes that helps you go to sleep. And I was like, are you sure that's not this one that we're listening to right now? This was so difficult to listen to. The unending amounts of narration with lots of adverbs, as Kevin pointed out, with lots of details that were completely irrelevant to anything. The fact that this story was selected when there are no twists or turns or questions around it, it's baffling to me. It's completely baffling. I always admire independent podcasters who are managing to, make a living or, monetize their work and who are doing their best. I admire that very much. That being said, I can't say that anyone would enjoy listening to this because I found it very, 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 very difficult to listen to. So yeah, thumbs down for me for this podcast. Maybe next time we'll like the season of Dakota Spotlight. We'll see, Kevin, right? That's going to do it for us. But before we go, Laura Bricker, I have to ask, do we have a cat of the week this week?
Mittens, the cat, is mistakenly left on a plane and becomes a frequent flyer.
Wow.
So a Maine Coon cat named Mittens became an accidental jet setter this month when her cage was overlooked in a plane cargo hold. And she went on 3 trips in 24 hours between New Zealand and Australia.
That cargo hold must have really smelled wonderful. 24 hours.
So the 8-year-old cat had been booked for a one-way trip from her family in New Zealand to their new home in Australia. But the owner said as they waited for the cat to be unloaded, hours passed, no sign of the cat. It was then that the ground staff said, hey, the plane has gone back to New Zealand with your cat.
Wow.
So the return trip was 7.5 hours. This poor cat had a happy ending.
Did? The poor cat had a happy ending.
That's awesome for him.
There was a happy ending.
Yeah.
There was a happy ending to this cat story because the moving company that apparently was specifically used for cat travel met the cat on the return trip and made sure that the cat was on the right plane. During this time, the cat did lose some weight, but was very happy to see their owner again. So I don't know what Mittens is going to do with these frequent flyer miles, where she's going to go next, but I'm glad she's okay.
All right, Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you and pitch any kind of animal to be cat of the week, how can they find you online?
You can find me at Laura Bricker on Instagram and Blue Sky.
You can also email us at crimewriterson@gmail.com with your pet stories or post them in our wonderful Facebook group, which I really encourage you to join. Toby Ball, how can folks find you online?
At TobyBallNH on the Blue Sky.
Kevin Flynn, if folks want more about adverbs and why they shouldn't be used in audio, how can they find you online?
They can enthusiastically reach out to me everywhere at Kevin P. Flynn.
Enthusiastically, lovingly, angrily.
Lolly, 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 get your adverbs. Indubitably.
If you want to follow me everywhere, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Blue Sky, etc., etc. You can find our show everywhere at Crime Writers On. And as I said a moment ago, please join our Facebook group. It is awesome. We have folks who are only staying with Meta for the sole purpose of being in our group because it is that good. Just find us on Facebook. There's directions on how to join the group. We'll let you in. It can be the only reason you come to Facebook, I swear. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll get the after show, Married with Podcast, and all the stuff we make back there. Our theme song was composed and performed by Tyler Gibbons. Our editor is the truly, wonderfully, terrifically excellent Livy Burdett. The EP of this show is Kevin Flynn.
Adverbs.
This show was recorded in Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also show great enthusiasm for the State High School Wrestling Championship. Go Hawks! On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. I just ate legit like a pound of gummy bears, and I felt so sick when I came down here. And you just start, you just can't stop. They're so freaking good.
I love gummy bears.
Yeah, it's like Skittles. I have the same issue with Skittles.
I have 2 jars on my counter. One of them is Sour Patch Kids, and one of them is Haribo. It's so good. Mm-hmm. So good.
If only they were good for you.
Partners in Crime Media.